hppodcraft.com.
It was somewhere at the back of beyond. Maybury would have found it difficult to be more precise. He was one who, when motoring outside his own territory, preferred to follow a route given by one of the automobile organizations, and on this very occasion, as on other previous ones, he had found reasons to deplore all deviation. This time, it had been the works manager's fault. The man had not only poured ridicule on the official route, but had stood at the yard gate in order to make quite certain that Maybury set off by the shortcut, which according to him, all the fellows in the firm used, and which departed in the exactly opposite direction. The most that could be said was that Maybury was presumably at the outer edge of the immense West Midlands conurbation. The outer edge it by now surely must be, as he seemed to have been driving for hours since he left the works, going round and round in large or small circles, asking the way and being unable to understand the answers, when answers were vouchsafed. All the time, seemingly more off course than ever.
Those were the opening few paragraphs of Robert Aickman's The Hospice, and we're going to give this strange story a strange study.
Because that's what we do here on hppodcraft.com, Strange Studies of Strange Stories. I'm Chad Pfeiffer.
And I'm Chris Lackey, and we're also on Patreon. This is a free show, but please consider subscribing for 6 shows a month and access to over 500 episodes in our archive.
Yeah, this is in fact episode 566 of the show right now. 566, the number of the guy one street over from the beast.
It is.
Larry. A significant number in great proximity to evil, and we have a guest here to join us on this special occasion.
We are joined by the writer of such joys as The League of Gentlemen, Funland, Psycho Bitches, and Tracy Ullman Show, Jeremy Dyson. Welcome, Jeremy.
Delighted to be with you guys. Really, it's a pleasure and a treat to get to talk about Aickman.
Jeremy has also written several books, including Bright Darkness, Lost Art of the Supernatural Horror Film, a nonfiction guide to horror films, and 2 collections of short stories entitled Never Trust a Rabbit, as well as the novel What Happens Now. There are some shows that kind of work their way into everyday conversation. The Simpsons, for example, it just becomes part of your speech pattern. League of Gentlemen is one of those shows for my wife and I. You know, when we're on the road, she'll go, oh, look, it's a local shop for local people. No accent, no imitation. That's just how you say that now.
Yeah.
We're huge fans, so I'm really excited to have you on the show.
Oh, that's great to know. Also that it crosses cultural divides as well. You know, we never were sure what Americans would make of it. So it's great to know that it plays to you.
Well, you almost suffered from that. I don't know what it is about human nature, but for a long time, people were saying, have I got the show for you? You are going to love this. And I thought, well, I'll show you. I'll just not watch it. But then when I finally did, I thought, oh my God, this is fantastic. And I have to say, while we were reading this Aickman story, I was thinking, there's definitely some influence here.
Oh, well, that's absolutely right. I mean, Aickman was one of the things that me and Mark Gatiss, my fellow League of Gentlemen co-writer, we bonded over Robert Aickman when we first met each other. It's one of the things we bonded over. So you're right to pick up on that resonance.
Our reader this week is none other than Greig Johnson. I'm sure everybody recognized him. He's been bugging me for a while to do some Aickman stuff, but I've dodged Aickman. I don't know why. You know, all the stuff that we cover, Aickman has been on the periphery. And I listened to, Jeremy, you did a BBC mini documentary on Radio 4, right? Was Radio 4?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, it was Radio 4.
You talk about how nobody seems to know who this guy is. Why is he on the periphery, do you think?
He's kind of less and less on the periphery, it has to be said. Well, I mean, he's still, I suppose, quite niche, but his reputation has definitely grown almost year on year, I think. But since he died quite in 1981, so 40 years ago. I mean, he was very celebrated in his own time. He was a World Fantasy Award winner more than once, I think. But in terms of mainstream acknowledgement, by say the literary establishment, that never came to him at all. And that's strange to me because he's such a phenomenally brilliant writer. You know, he is up there with M.R. James, with well, take your pick, but I'd say he's up there with Poe, and he's certainly up there with Ray Bradbury as a unique voice in supernatural fiction or strange fiction. Strange stories is how he described his own work.
Which is so killer for us since we just recently rebranded to Strange Studies of Strange Stories. I was like, hey, he gets it. I love it. This is perfect.
I mean, mean, he's so unique. His voice is so unlike anybody else's that may be part of it. Maybe that is enough to just alienate people, or maybe as time passes, he will become more and more known. Only time will tell.
My first acquaintance with Aickman happened a couple of years ago at a bookstore where my wife picked up a copy of Dark Entries randomly because she liked the cover art. We didn't know anything. I thought maybe it was because of the Bauhaus song, but she liked that cover art. Neither of us had read him. This is part of a series that collects Aickman's fiction from Faber and Faber. The story we're reading today is in the collection Cold Hand in Mine, which you're mentioned in the introduction in that collection, actually.
Oh, in this latest reprint, yeah. In
Cold Hand in Mine, yeah.
But I've been sort of associated with Aickman for probably about 20 years and publicly now, because I've sort of, because he was an obsession, I've adapted his work. Mark did a radio adaptation. I've done a short film of one of his stories. Strangely, I did an oratorio, a sung like a mini opera, which of one of his stories called The Same Dog, which I wrote the words for, or adapted the words for. So he's been an obsession for as long as I've been a professional writer.
And now, how did you come across him? Was there, when you were a child, did some creepy uncle pass it off to you?
Well, almost exactly that. Aickman in the 70s used to edit the Fontana Book of Ghost Stories, which was a recurring anthology of ghost stories. It came out regularly through the 60s and 70s. So I was very young in the 70s. I was probably about 7 or 8, but I had a reputation for liking spooky stuff even then. There was one year when I got bought loads of stuff for my birthday, and there were 2 Aickman edited collections that I got that year. They were completely unsuitable for a 7-year-old. Because these stories, they're not just terrifying, but they're kind of insidious. They get inside your head. That was where it began. And I don't think, to be honest, I don't think I read too many of his stories then. He always used to put one of his stories in those collections, because they would have just obviously gone over the head of a 7-year-old. He didn't really get me as a fan until I was probably about 20. It was when I started reading him properly. But I knew him as the Ghost Man because of those collections. The seed was planted there, and then it kind of flowered quite a bit later. When there was, as I say, when it was about 19 or 20, when there was a reprint of Cold Hand in Mine. There was a mid-80s reprint of Cold Hand in Mine. And that was what got me. I was blown away. I couldn't believe it. Literally, from the first story, it was almost like something I've been waiting to read. It was everything that I wanted in supernatural fiction.
Well, it certainly feels that way for both of us, because we're new readers to Aickman, and it's a sliding scale between the stories we cover on this show. Sometimes, more often than not, these are straight monster stories, whereas this is more like The Willows, where it's that much more rarefied air of weird fiction, where he really achieves, I think, the things that Lovecraft set out when he described what this is, which is a touch from the outside. I read the story, the School Friend, first, and it scared the hell out of me.
Yeah, it's terrifying.
Really did.
It's terrifying, The School Friend. Yeah,
which is it doesn't happen very often.
No, it doesn't.
So to me, I thought, wow, this is the top shelf stuff we're discovering here.
Yeah, and a lot of his stories will do that. The Stains is one that really upset me and really, genuinely frightened me. And the Swords, lots of them have that effect. Yeah,
I just read that on my way to Scotland. Well, I listened to the audio of it on my way to Scotland. The kids had their headphones in the back, and it's just one of these things where you think it's going someplace and it goes this other place. And there's always, with his writing, I'm probably jumping ahead of myself, it could always be something else. Like, I always feel like maybe it's supernatural, maybe it's not supernatural, but it's definitely not normal. And it's right. Unsettling in that way that life is often unsettling, where
it's too much like life.
It's a little too much like life, but in a great way. I don't understand how this guy has flown under the radar, especially for me and the stuff that we've covered. I should have listened to Greig.
You're a fool.
I'm just busy. Guys got stuff to do.
One takeaway is that you're a fool.
But it happens. Listen, I've literally only in the last year read Arthur Machen. which is to me unbelievable, because Aickman is such a huge figure in supernatural fiction, and it's just taken me that long to get round to him for some reason, and was blown away by Aickman, who actually is a touchstone for Aickman, I think, as well, in terms of the strangeness and the weirdness and that sense of having stepped out of the ordinary world. It happens because we are finite creatures.
We are.
Well, but it's always such good news. I mean, this was great news because I have all these books to read now.
Yeah.
Well, how about a little bit of bio, Chris?
Sure. Aickman, he was born in London. Robert Aickman was born in London in 1914, the son of an architect, and he was the grandson of the Victorian novelist Richard Marsh, known for his occult thriller The Beetle, which was very popular at the time.
It outsold Dracula, I read, at the time in 1897. We might get into it at some point because it has something to do with an ancient Egyptian entity that manifests through a beetle and has really specifically weird mind powers and stuff. So that's right. That's in our wheelhouse. So we might get around to Grandpa's work as well.
Robert Aickman studied architecture like his old man, and I'm not sure how he made his living at first, which his bio that I can find on it is very vague about how he made money.
Well, it's very mysterious how he made his living. It seems he must have had a small private income, as they used to say, maybe some stipend or some pension or something that he was able to live quite frugally on, because he seemed to sort of please himself. I mean, he did have another professional life, or semi-professional life, as that he founded the Inland Waterways Association, or co-founded it. But in the UK, that was the canals, which had all completely fallen into disrepair. The UK had a big canal network that dated back to pre-railway times, and they were all still there, but they were just completely grown over and clogged with weeds and forgotten. And so this organisation that Aickman started rescued the canals, and they're all, most of those canals are open now, or many of them are open because of Aickman. It wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for him and the other people in that organisation. So that's a major contribution to British culture as well, albeit a non-literary one. So, fascinating man.
We love our canals around here.
Oh, yes. Well, yes.
At Keighley,
Yeah, you've got the Leeds Liverpool running by you, haven't you?
We do. Yeah. Walk by it often. We walk a dog down there on Saturdays. It's great. I love the canals. Robert was married to author Edith Gregerson in 1941, but then they divorced 16 years later. But he wasn't remarried after that. That was it for his married life.
It was, although he did apparently have a fairly long-standing affair with Elizabeth Jane Howard, who was his who's a great English writer, who wrote some fantastic supernatural fiction in their own right. In fact, the first book that Aickman published was co-written with her. They wrote 3 stories each, called We Are for the Dark is the name of the collection. I think their affair started after that. She worked in the Inland Waterways Association. She was a secretary, I think, of the Inland Waterways Association, or was there in some capacity, and I think that's how they met. But she was a big literary figure because she went on to be a renowned novelist. I think she was married to Kingsley Amis. Was it Kingsley Amis? I think she was, who was a great British novelist.
Oh, love triangle. I smell the romantic comedy.
Yeah, well, it's a very literary arrangement. A sort of, I don't know, wasn't quite a menage a trois, but I think it was a fairly open secret that she was having an affair with Aickman. So
now he was interested in the supernatural, and he was a member of the Society of Psychical Research and the Ghost Club.
Yeah, that's right. Now that Society of Psychical Research, which Harry Price, the famous ghost hunter, he was another famous member of that organization.
I've read a little bit about his idea or his beliefs in the supernatural were sort of very open-ended or vague. Like he didn't necessarily literally believe in transparent entities floating around. It was something else.
I think that's right. Yeah. Again, he's not really documented about it, but it was all about the feel for him. He was a very, very sensitive man by all accounts. It was about the atmosphere, the feeling. I mean, he did allude to experiences that he'd had in letters and things, to correspondence, but never went on record as you say, as a sort of card-carrying believer in tangible ghosts and spirits. But it was definitely part of his interest in the esoteric. And that there are more things in heaven and earth.
He died of cancer, or he got cancer in 1979, but he refused medical treatment and opted for homeopathy.
I believe that's right, yeah. And I think he died in the homeopathic hospital. Yeah, so again, another sort of example of his belief in esoteric and non-material. I mean, he was a great skeptic about modernity. In fact, that's another reason why he may come back into fashion now, because this is something that is increasingly in the mainstream. But he was somebody who concluded that mankind took a wrong turn at the Industrial Revolution, as far as he was concerned. I think that's something he was on record as saying. That's an undercurrent in all of his fiction, really, is this loathing for sort of secular materialism. So in many ways, he's a kind of religious writer without being in any way denominational. He was not identified as a Christian or following anything, and yet there is a very spiritual quality to his work. That's very much what he's about, and on quite a deep level, I think. So yes, the homeopathy sort of fits in with that, I think.
He received the World Fantasy Award in 1975, and we actually have a quote of something that he wrote in response to it. I'll have Greg read this.
I believe in what the Germans term Ehrfurcht, reverence for things one cannot understand. Faust's error was an aspiration to understand and therefore master things which, by God or by nature, are set beyond the human compass. He could only achieve this at the cost of making the achievement pointless. Once again, it is exactly what modern man has done. I believe in life after death, and I decline to particularize upon the meaning of the words. Because of all futile and reductionist attempts at definition, this is the most idle. Most of my stories aim at universal themes, however difficult it may be to attain them.
So this is somebody who's just saying, I don't understand it all, and I think it's arrogant to say that you understand it all, which is something that I'm perfectly in alignment with. I think that's a great attitude to have.
The thing is, you can't argue with that, because that's the truth. I mean, another writer I think he's got a lot in common with is Kafka. And Kafka had this great phrase, which was, the thing about being human is that you keep coming up against the bony limits of your own forehead. That's exactly Aickman's position as well. There's limits to what we can know. Most of it is mystery. And the sort of pretense of modernity is that actually we know everything. And anything we don't know, we will know. It's only a matter of time. But it's a nonsensical position, because
absolutely,
obviously we're bounded by our biology. And the idea that we can comprehend all of reality, it just seems insane that anyone would even posit that.
Yeah.
And yet that's the modern position, because we're so in love with our technology and our science.
That's the arrogance. Boy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Different show maybe, because I'm like, let's talk about that for a while. But we should dig into this story.
Yeah.
Yes. The Hospice was originally part of his collection, Cold Hand in Mine, 8 Strange Stories, released in 1975. Jeremy, you chose this one for us to cover as the first one. Why this story?
Well, I think I chose it because it's the one that hit me first. I think it's in the edition of Cold Hand in Mine that I've got, I think it's probably the second story, maybe the third. And the minute I read it, it was like a complete mind blown. It was like nothing I'd ever read before. The impact it had on me was extraordinary. It's a supernatural story, but there's nothing supernatural in it, or there's perhaps one possible supernatural event, but there's no ghosts, there's no monsters, there's no vampires. It wasn't like anything else, and it was hard to understand at the time I read it when I was 20 how it was doing what it was doing to me. And I've since, over the years, got a bit more of a handle on that. But yeah, it was just it was a big light bulb, a massive epiphany for me.
Well, it's also funny. It's a funny story, surprisingly, and it carries the humor across in a way where I'm not sure what the joke is. It's an absurd situation that I'm laughing at, but I feel menaced and uncomfortable at the same time. And that's when I was saying, this is clearly informative of League of Gentlemen. This is definitely imprinted on that in some way, because I had those sensations watching that show as well.
There's a lot of comedy of manners in Aickman, and you get a lot of that in this story. He was an acute observer of sort of English politeness and the hypocrisy that went along with that, or how politeness and manners are used to cover up terrible behavior. His characters are beautiful, and particularly when he's in this very dryly comic mode, as he is here. The Hospice is a hotel, is a sort of hotel of sorts, and he gets how the staff speak, and that sort of brilliantly English thing of how staff in a hotel can have absolute disdain for you, even as they're speaking politely. The Fawlty Towers thing. That's very peculiar to the English, who have no concept of service at all. There is no such thing as English service. And so there's a lot of that going on at the start of the story, which draws you in because you recognize it. It feels true.
Well, that opening, I think, for me, is its own little horror story. Simply that the man insists he takes the other way that he doesn't want to take, and then he has to because he's watching him. That just filled me with so much anxiety right away. I hate it when somebody asks me to do something and then watches me while I do it. What if I don't want to do this, And he has to stand. Well, that guy stands there. He drives off in the opposite direction of where he wants to go. You could have stopped there. That's scary to me.
And it's a little foreshadowing for everything that's going to come as well.
Mm-hmm.
And plus, of course, we're introduced to Maybury as a man who's literally lost. And as the story unfolds, we discover that he's figuratively lost as well. He's somebody who's lost in his life, or lost his way in his life. So it's a great opening on many levels, because it's doing about 3 or 4 things at once.
He's low on petrol, pulls over, finds himself in some kind of suburb. There are houses, but they're set way back from the main road.
It's so relatable. It's exactly where you find yourself when you have to go to the bathroom so badly on a road trip, and suddenly there's no businesses, it's just houses, and they look non-hospitable. He's got a wife, Angela, and a son at home. He doesn't want to run out of gas in the middle of nowhere if he just keeps driving. So he, for a moment, is going to look for help on foot. I thought it was interesting that he stopped at a place he describes as a bifurcation in the road. So it's essentially a crossroads. Right?
Yeah, you could go either way once again.
Now, as he heads off down one of the roads on a little sidewalk, he's attacked by something. And this was the first instance of something that also happened in The School Friend, where I was very lulled into the pace of the text, and then something happened very abruptly. And I feel like the description in the text probably took about the same amount of time to read as the incident. It's just sudden and disorienting. It says his wife and son were awaiting him. He must resume the fight to rejoin them, and then suddenly, something shot out at him from the boskage on his left. He had disturbed a cat, returned to its feral habitude. The first he knew of it was its claws, or conceivably its teeth, sunk into his left leg. There had been no question of ingratiation or cuddling up. Maybury kicked out furiously. The strange sequel was total silence.
So the thing is, you don't know quite what's bitten him, and that almost to me like a quotation from Casting Maroons, the M.R. James story, where the protagonist puts his hand under the pillow and something bites him. It's definitely an omen. It's not quite a cat.
Yeah, infuriatingly vague. Maybe he saw the eyes. There was no mew or scream, so it was a silent attack too. And then the injury hurt so much he doesn't want to look at it or touch it. So I found this to be something that he does, is he distances us. Sometimes we get unreliable narrators, or we get narrators that are really doing that on purpose. They're dropping information, but he packs in real human ways to do it. I don't even want to look at that. And then I'm sitting here with the book going, look at it. I want to know what happened. What happened to your leg? You jerk. But this definitely could have been some kind of guardian at the gate if this is zooming off into another plane of reality or something. I was very interested at this point. But the injury is such that he stops walking, he heads back to his car, and he gets in to continue driving.
But he comes across this sign for a hotel called the Hospice. It's arranged in a strange way on the page as well. It says the Hospice, good fare, and then accommodate.
Some accommodation. And I have to say that detail, that was I think the thing that really got me in terms of making me fall in love with Aickman. It's so unusual. It's such an odd detail to do that sort of typographical game. It's like a poet might do.
It made me think of E.E. Cummings or something.
Yeah, or something from Tristram Shandy. There's something meta about it. But he's not that kind of writer. The last thing he is a postmodern writer, and yet it's playful. It's so it's almost like something from a Monty Python book or something. It's so unexpected that it's completely charming as well as being very strange. And it's so strange that it's almost permanently lodged in my psyche, that good food, some accommodation sign. I just think of it all the time.
It knocks you into the modern world a bit as well, because we're so used to reading things that were initially printed in pulps. People weren't experimenting with the actual typographic layout as part of the story. When I came across that, I was, this wasn't written in the 30s. This is from, I don't know when he wrote it, but this was published in the 70s.
Early 70s.
Like the 60s.
It was early 70s, yeah.
So it suddenly brought me into, this is somebody who is going to be writing around the same time as these postmodern authors and people who were playing with what does it look like? What do the margins look like? Well, how do we actually put this on the page? And that was really invigorating as well.
Yeah, and it's about the only time he does it in any of his stories as well. So it's, it's just a gorgeous detail and perfectly judged because it just fits tonally. It's as a piece of taste. literary taste on his part. It's
it heightens the horror a little bit too, because when you see the broken sign or you see the poorly laid out sign, you think, well, what else is wrong with this place?
Well, and also as someone who grew up and, or at least, started life in Britain at that time, I recognize that. I recognize the kind of place that he's alluding to, these kind of half-timbered restaurants that would be in suburban areas that would be sort of gesturing back to Tudor times. There was a lot of mock Tudor in Britain in the 20th century, and it's got that feel, like that sign. I could picture that sort of place. There's a place in Ilkley called the Box Tree, which is a very fancy restaurant in Ilkley where I live, and they've very much got that aesthetic. It's sort of as if it's something from an old castle or tavern.
Right.
A hospice is a place where people who are terminally ill go to spend their last days in a modern sense, but it does have an alternative meaning.
Yes, it goes back. Hospice actually refers to the hospice movement itself is relatively recent. So only a little bit earlier than this story was written, the hospice movement was started, probably in the mid-60s, I think. But yes, the hospices before that were hospitals. They were Catholic hospitals in medieval times, but they also took in pilgrims as well. You either went there if you were sick or if you were a pilgrim. You didn't go there if you were a casual visitor.
Certainly, it seems an odd choice of hotel name, but yes, this is in the 70s is when the hospice movement was coming up.
Yeah, and there's no way it can't have that meaning. It's redolent of terminal illness. It's something, and so that's immediately terribly unsettling because, certainly, I was aware of what hospices were when I was a kid, and and the idea there was one near us, near our house when I was growing up. You would drive past it every day on the way to school, and it used to frighten me because I had no idea what went on in there. And so he's absolutely playing on all those associations.
From a story standpoint too, it's he's going into a place where people die, and as a guy who reads these types of stories, I'm thinking, oh, this is not going to be good for him.
No, it's bad foreshadowing.
And also the strangeness within the story of what kind of, because the place is very much a hotel. It says good food, some accommodation. What kind of hotel would call itself a hospice?
Exactly.
I don't know.
The question that's begged by that is enormous and funny.
And this thing is old, right? Because when he pulls his car up there, he sees that there's another path this is a recently carved in entrance, and there's another much older path that stretches off toward the woods or the bushes, right?
And yet it's got the gate that's like from a farmyard, a modern farmyard. He says it's like the gate to a big bullpen or something. Again, just everything's wrong. It's not the sort of gate that you would have on a hotel or a restaurant. And a big security light comes on as well, a very bright light. So every expectation that you've got is kind of immediately inverted, all in the space of a paragraph.
Instead of a creepy butler answering the door, it's a handsome young man.
Yeah.
Curly fair hair, untroubled face, white jacket, very cherubic, very angelic, and doesn't seem troubled that the protagonist is here. He's troubled because it seems dinner's already started, but he just assumes this guy is late to it.
Mayberry he's taken to the dining room. There's a long table down the center. Everyone is quietly eating. Nobody's talking. And it's mixed ages. Mayberry, he sat at a side table, not at this big main table. He notices there is an attractive middle-aged woman sitting at another one of these side tables.
He can't really make out details of anybody. It's very hot and stuffy, and people are mostly very quiet, which is odd. And again, a lot of the horror in the story are these mundane discomforts. Not getting information on what is going on is so anxiety-inducing. Those were the things that were gripping me. Can you just tell me what the program is here? And how much am I going to be charged for all this? There was some economic anxiety later as well. This food's really good.
It's the physical details, too, because it's uncomfortably hot, so immediately you're kind of reading that, and by now if you're reading it you are Mayberry, so you're imagining yourself in that position, so there's the physical discomfort of the heat. But then the really chilling stuff starts when he's served the food, which is good, but there's too much of it and it's thick. So he's served this thick soup first of all on an enormous plate, and he has to eat all of it. And someone stands over him like a nanny,
Stands over him like the guy that watched him drive away. Yeah. All of that it's somebody over your shoulder watching what you do. It's so uncomfortable. And I also thought in that moment, because he says the soup is a lot, but then the bowl, the receptacle itself is deeper and wider than he thought. And it's inscribed with these letters, the hospice, he says, rather in the style of a baby's plate. And I thought as he was describing it, wait a minute, is this a large volume of soup or is he getting smaller? You know, is he somehow devolving into a more childlike state? And I noticed there was a lot of language about being a child, being a baby. He's being treated in a childlike manner. Everything is sort of babyish and small. So, what's going on here?
Is it for his own good? And then when the next course is brought out, and it's, again, the description's so vivid, and it's a huge slab of oily turkey and you know, too many potatoes. It always makes me think of years ago, we went to, it was Christmas. Some friends had invited us for tea and cake in the afternoon. So we had Sunday lunch, and then we went to, arrived at our friend's house. This was me and my wife. Actually, they'd made us lunch. It wasn't tea and cake. They'd cooked us lunch, and we were too embarrassed to say that we'd already had quite a big lunch, and they'd made this huge Christmas lunch, and it was exactly like, it was the most awful thing, having to try and force food in when you're not hungry.
You're not hungry, and it's hot too, and eating when it's hot.
That's an illness thing as well, you know, a loss of appetite, and having to eat when you're ill. It's that seems to be part of the mix as well. So all of this is just adding up. The little odd details are getting just this gradual escalation of discomfort.
Right, and then my favorite line in the story, which is funny, is when he's, I can't get through this plate of pasta if you want me to eat that next course, which she had told him was turkey, as if he was a little boy and it was his favorite meal. And then the woman says, it's turkey tonight. You know how turkey just slips down you? It's so disgusting that she says. It's a very viscous food. It won't be a problem for you to eat it at all.
And then you get the breaking of all social convention, where this is the waitress who's serving to him, then loses her temper and knocks the food to the floor again, which is part funny but also part terrifying, because that breaking of social conventions is often a very scary thing. It's very unsettling.
This story does this a lot, and I think that's the nature of his writing. I think, okay, this is the point that it's going to shift. This is going to be the point. She's done something. She's broken this rule, like done this thing. Okay, so now he's going to realize he's in some weird dungeon, or these people are going to kill him, or something typical weird fiction kind of story. But then the manager comes up, Faulkner, and just says, oh, I'm sorry about this. And then it gets back to normal again. She's got problems. We're really sorry about this. We'll clean it up. And it's like, okay, it's not what I thought it was going to be. And the story just keeps doing that. It keeps taking you to the edge, and you think, okay, here we go. And then, nope, we're bringing you right back again to which is really unsettling.
Because he gets off the hook at that point. When that disaster's happened, you know what? We'll give you some coffee, go to the lounge. And then as he's going to the lounge, maybe he notices something much more curious. A central rail ran the length of the long table a few inches above the floor. To this rail, one of the male guests was attached by a fetter round his left ankle.
This is a major turning point, because whatever's happened up until this point can sort of have an explanation, you know, even the waitress losing her temper, you know, maybe she's just having a bad day, and you know, it could sort of be accountable for, but there's no accounting for the guests being chained.
It's a new concept.
There's no possible explanation.
Farm to table, or else
one guy is chained to it that he sees,
that he can see.
But what if it is just the one guy? Why is this one guy chained up? Why are the other people not, if that's what's going on as well? Like, there's just so many questions. Nothing gets answered, and you just get moved on to the next part of the story.
But it's worth as well just passing comments on the brilliance of Aickman here, because these details are all strange, but none of them are arbitrary. You know, everything it sort of has its own weird internal logic, even though it's impossible to discern what it is. A bit like David Lynch, you know, it's like there's not many people who can do that without it just being annoying or you know, or stupid. But it's like in the way that a dream has its own consistent logic and everything in a dream belongs in a dream. These are like Aickman's dreams. Everything belongs there. Each of these choices is sort of immaculate.
It feels like that's a real thing that's really happening. I don't understand it. I'm not privy to the insights to this whole situation, but it would make sense if I just knew, if I was able to cross over into that world, but I can't. And that's why anybody could just do weird, random stuff, but it'll feel weird and random. This doesn't feel weird and random. I mean, it is weird, but it feels like, oh, wait, I'm getting a glimpse of this bigger picture, but I can't see enough of it to put it all together. And that's what feels really great about the story.
The famous Bob Dylan lyric from Ballad of a Thin Man. There's something going on here. I just don't know what it is. And that's the trick. There's something going on. How do you do that without having any story there at all? It's a hard thing to do that Lynch does, and a few people are very good at. This is not random.
No, it's. I mean, and who knows what his process was? I mean, he wrote very carefully. His output is fairly small. There's less than 50 published stories written over 30 odd years, and so he obviously took a lot of time over these stories, and who knows how much revision there was. And I think he was very careful. I mean, I'm sure he was instinctive, but I also feel that he was a very good editor of himself as well.
He's in this lounge. That middle-aged woman that he saw before, the attractive one, comes in, followed by that young guy that initially let him in, and her name is Cecile.
She says that she's related to this Chaminade, Cecile Chaminade, who was a French composer and pianist, who was awarded, first woman to be awarded the Legion of Honor for a female composer. What's the significance of that? Is this a ghost of somebody I thought, or what's going on?
I don't know, again, whether that's just one of his odd details that he just throws in that feels right. But again, it feels right. It makes it, because there's such specificity to it, it makes everything feel real. I think
it does. And then it also naturally flows into conversation, because he says, oh, well, I have a famous relation. I'm related to this person, Solway Short, who I think is fictional, but who's a racing motorist that this person definitely would have seen in the newspaper. This is somebody whom they would know who it is if she was connected to the modern world. And she has no idea who it is. She says, I don't watch television. So I feel like maybe it isn't significant. It was just a way to get to this point, which is that this person is very out of time. Outside of time. She explains about the hospice only that people come for the rest, they come for the food, that the tremendous amount of food is necessary. It's the restorative, you might say, she says. And he actually says, do you come here often? Which is funny. She says, life would be impossible otherwise. All these people in the world without enough food, living without love, without even proper clothes to keep the cold out. What is she getting at? I mean, there's some sort of, this is a place where the wretched can go, the place where people can go as a refuge from the cruel world. It's funny because you just naturally think, is he dead and he's in some kind of heavenly place or something? But that just seems way too... I
think the key line there is probably living without love. This is something, obviously, well, it's going to play out from here on into the end of the story. Mabry makes, there are references to his marriage and the state of his marriage, and sex, of course, comes in. And sex was a big deal for Aickman, and never straightforward. Always complicated, always inscrutable, dangerous, and never straightforward. And what happens next is very much part of a consistent thing with him.
Well, she begins seducing Mayberry, who seems like he might be up for it, although he is married, like you said. But still, he's bothered because that guy, that young man, the cherub-faced dude, is just standing around in the room with them. And she tells him, oh, that's Vincent. He looks like a Greek god, but he's impotent. What does that have to do with anything? That doesn't change the fact that I don't want a dude standing around while we're gonna, I'm gonna cheat on my wife with you. It's
there
crazy.
Will be no visual arousal. How do you not get that? That's what makes it cool. It adds to it.
How does she know Vincent's impotence as well? There's so much in those few lines, so much implication.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now, eventually, all the other people come rolling in, and the romance has to stop. But she tells Mayberry she's in room 23.
And then Faulkner comes in and says, to bed, all of you. And they just go. It's 10 o'clock at night. It's I don't think I've stayed in a hotel that has that kind of thing going on.
even an English one. No, you can't get any food after 10 o'clock.
Mayberry asks Faulkner if there's anywhere nearby to get petrol, and he says there isn't, but they could siphon off some of the gas from one of their cars. Faulkner goes with him to move his car closer to where the cars are. But when Mayberry gets into the car, the strange thing happens. He blanks on how to start his car. He just has that moment where how do I start my car?
To me, this is the scariest thing in the whole story. This is the moment that I can remember really got me when I read it.
As a middle-aged man, I could relate to this. It's one of these things where you're like, I just feel myself slipping as the older I get, little things at a time. The other day, I have the same password on my computer for the last 5 years. I just couldn't remember it because it was second nature to me. I just would type it without even thinking about it, and I couldn't remember. Yeah. I had to sit for a few minutes, it felt like hours, to try and remember what that password was. And eventually it did come to me, and the moment passed. But when that happens in that story, it feels real to me.
Well, and also it's an exaggeration, because it's one thing to remember a phrase or a word or the name of a song or somebody's name, but to not remember how to start a car
Yes.
is a whole other level of, well, be it senility or whatever. And when I first read it, again, as a young man, it had weirdly, I made a sexual association. It was like sort of not knowing what to do in bed.
Huh.
And I don't know why that was. And maybe it's because it comes on the back of that incident of failed seduction. It was an odd, and that might have just been my reading of it. But there's something very strange. It's more than just premature senility. It's in that detail. Whatever's made him go for it, he's unraveling.
I think there's the everyday anxiety of it, because even when I remember being in high school and forgetting my locker combination, even though you've filled it in every day. And then the panic that sets in, maybe I'll never have access to this again. I also think that he could have said, I wanted to open the door, but I was too weak to do it, which is a very common feeling you have when you're in dreams and nightmares. But it's like he skipped past the thing that would be a more conventional way to describe it and went to this. So that by the time you read it and process it, you've had the feeling without being able to attach it to an existing schema. It was just such a great way to get around and make me feel that weakness in a new way.
Yeah, and also, the not being able to start the motor, not being able to escape, not having lost control. There's so many associations with that show you what a fine writer Aickman is in that choice of detail, because there's so much meaning in that it's open but not entirely open. Again, it sits with everything else that's going on.
And there's this creepy workman, Cromie, who's big and bulging, and he moves the car for him. He can get it to work so they can get it close to the big vehicle they're going to siphon petrol from. Of course, that's the moment when the hotel manager remembers, oh, that runs on diesel. But what was the deal with this guy, Cromie? He says his work is usually on a big scale, so the car detail might be hard for him. He's got these big yellow misshapen hands. He seems very monstrous.
I mean, that seems a sort of emasculation thing going on there, that he's a big man, and again, there's the sexual thing going on. The handyman's a big man, and Maybury feels his feet.
He even says, oh, you're too much. You're working that too hard. You're too abrupt with it. And he gets it working, and it's fine.
Now, Maybury has to spend the night at the hospice. They also have no phone there, so he can't call his wife. Again, very odd, but not supernatural. It's not crossing over that line. At least for me, it's not.
No, it's not. No, it's and in the early 1970s, certainly in the UK, there were places didn't have phones. I mean, not businesses, as Maybury goes on to say. It's ridiculous that a business couldn't have a phone, but certainly private houses. It wasn't like everybody had a telephone. Not then. So it's just about there's a line of plausibility there that is very strange, but not supernatural, as you say.
The room that he's going to have at this place is shared. All the rooms are shared in this place, and he's going to have to room with this guy Bannard.
Which more anxiety, right? Having to share a room with a stranger.
And isn't Bannard already in his pajamas, or does he go and put his pajamas on? There's some odd intimacy there.
He's got to borrow pajamas from this guy who's apparently stayed there so long that he's got a drawer full of them, and they're all the same, folded neatly. What's going on? And then he actually, for the first time, looks at his injury. Thankfully, it's a huge gash with dried blood. At that moment, I went, "Oh yes." Now, it's credible that I forgot the injury because I'm reading the story. How did he forget about it while he was eating with all
there's been a lot going on, so
But Bannard doesn't want to see that injury. He says it is bad for me to see things like that. It really seems to upset his roommate.
I mean, there's more infantilizing going on, isn't there? Because they're now like little boys in a shared bedroom. Either a school dormitory, or it's got that sort of feel to it. And so that's very odd and unsettling.
Well, I mean, he's a middle-aged man as well. He's very nice, this Bannard, but a little creepy in a way that you can't quite put your finger on. They put out the lights, and Bannard sneaks out.
Maybury began to wonder whether something had gone wrong with his own time faculty, such as it was. Something that is of medical significance. That whole evening and night, from soon after his commitment to the recommended route, he had been in doubt about his place in the universe, about what people called the state of his nerves. Here was evidence that he had good reason for anxiety. Then, from somewhere within the house, came a shattering, ear-piercing scream, and then another and another. It was impossible to tell whether the din came from near or far, still less whether it was female or male. Maybury had not known that the human organism could make so loud a noise, even in the bitterest distress. It was shattering to listen to, especially in the enclosed, hot, total darkness. And this was nothing momentary. The screaming went on and on, a paroxysm, until Maybury had to clutch at himself, not to scream in response.
I mean, that's horrible.
Oh, my God,
a scream so loud, you didn't know a human could make it, no matter how great the distress. It's just such a horrible detail, because what caused it? And then, and who? Who is the source of the scream?
And what do you do? What is your responsibility to investigate, solve, find out, report?
But also, when something like that happens, other people respond. He's in a hotel full of people. He should be hearing people running around in the halls. He should hear clamoring, talking, like, what's going on? People shouting. Nothing. He doesn't hear anything besides that.
Again, there's a sexual undercurrent as well. You can't, one thing, if you've ever been in a hotel room and heard people having sex next door, it's an alarming thing. And if we think about the infantilism, if you were a child and you were to hear people having sex next door in a hotel room, that must occasionally happen. What would you make of it? Again, the richness of the associations that are in there.
Now, why haven't I seen that scene anywhere, though? Because if I was a kid and I was in a hotel room, I would definitely be with my parents. So do we all sit there and listen to the sex happening in the next room together?
You're right. That's a great scene. That is a good scene.
Aickman missed a trick there. He should have put that scene in there somehow.
Now, Maybury tries to turn on the light, but it doesn't work. He tries to open the door, but it's locked. He goes to open the curtains, but no light comes in.
That's another scary high point for me, because it's so nightmarish. When he opens the curtains and there's just wall behind them.
Yes.
That's a horrible, horrible thing. The claustrophobia of it.
And it feels very dreamlike. You're trying to do something simple, like turn on a light, get out of a room, open up a window, and nothing is working. These things aren't happening.
Yeah.
Now, he's not sure if Bannard is a killer or not, but he hears him come back in, and he could smell Cecile's perfume on him. And then Bannard, he stands by Maybury's bed. Maybury's thinking, is he going to kill me now? Is that what's going to happen? No, he just wants to talk. He turns on the light, which now works, and Maybury notices that Bannard looks older, like years older, and also just kind of different.
It's as if he's played by a different actor. If this was an adaptation, it would be now a different actor. I mean, and that's terrifying. And a classic Aickman detail. It's sort of a simple detail, but I can't think of any other story I've read that has anything like that in it. Somebody changing, even though they're still apparently the same person. From perhaps in the Magus, there's a bit of that going on, the John Fowles novel. But, it's just so troubling on every level. And of course,
on every level.
And he's come back now and he's turned into, there's a little scene that follows that's a bit like the Monty Python Nudge Nudge sketch, where Bannard starts asking him queasy details about his wife. Mm-hmm. Asking, is she pretty?
Say no more? Yeah.
Yes, it's all exactly that. Yeah.
But this part here with this, it was interesting on so many levels because he drops a detail here about Maybury that he has some level of face blindness, perhaps. When he was younger at school, he couldn't tell other boys apart from one another, and he kept it on the down low. He would just do what he had to do to get through those situations, and luckily it never caused too great an embarrassment to him, although some. So this could entirely be because of some condition that he doesn't report to other people, that he knows he has. It seems that he's ashamed about, even though it's out of his control. Which goes into the next thing, which is I think we all have a ton of anxiety based around identifying people, getting somebody's name wrong, not knowing them, even though they've introduced themselves to you. And so him coming back in, the way that he expresses, I think he's a different guy, but maybe I just wasn't paying attention before. Again, it's like with running the car. These are things that I should be able to do and I can't, and maybe it's my own weakness. And so there's this level of shame in everything in here about that. I thought that part was so interesting.
And then throw into that the fact that this change has happened whilst he's heard the loudest scream he's ever heard a human being make. So there's obviously some connection, as you've already said. Is it that Bannard's a murderer? But why is he changed? And who is it that screamed? And was it the first Bannard that screamed, and now this other one is an imposter that's replaced him? Or
it gets back to, we actually just covered the Sandman, the E.T.A. Hoffman story, in which there's a lot of use made of doppelgangers and people who look similar, who show up again with a different name, and we brought in how Freud Freud wrote about that in his essay, The Uncanny, how knowing somebody but not knowing them is that core of the uncanny feeling. Unfriendlich. It's another, these German words. Germans have the concepts for all of this stuff, it appears. Or unhomely, I think is what the translation
Unheimlich,
is. Unheimlich, that's what it is. I not unfriended or whatever I just said. That was but again, that idea is coming up of something being familiar and yet totally unfamiliar as just such a unique mental state to be in, and one that produces a lot of terror.
He asks Bannard about the scream, and he says, I didn't hear anything, which is obviously insane because it was so crazy loud. They have this strange little conversation about the hospice and about how hot Mayberry's wife is, like you were saying before, which really doesn't give us any insight, but is just kind of off-putting. Then Mayberry just wants to go back to sleep, and Bannard agrees. He goes, okay, let's go back to bed. Now, in the morning, they're both served tea in their room. Bannard looks like the younger original Bannard, now in the light of day. Mayberry wants to get the heck out of there, and Faulkner explains that, well, unfortunately there's been a death in the hotel, and he doesn't want anybody to know about it because guests don't want to be upset by this kind of thing. They want a pleasurable experience. So he waives all the charges on the room and board because Mr. Mayberry has been put at an inconvenience. And Faulkner arranges for Mayberry to leave with the hearse that's going to be taking out the body.
Mayberry was compelled to travel with the coffin itself because there simply was not room for him on the front seat, where a director of the firm, a corpulent man, had to be accommodated with the driver. The nearness of death compelled a respectful silence among the company in the rear compartment, especially when a living stranger was in the midst, and Mayberry alighted unobtrusively when a bus stop was reached. One of the undertaker's men said that he should not have to wait long.
It's such a great last line.
Now, this was the first Aickman story I read, so when I got to the end, I go, huh? What, this is the end?
the traditional ending. I gotta say, by the way, we glossed over it, but the breakfast was immense as well. And when it was described, I know, I grew up in the 70s, people ate weird stuff. Lots of gelatinous molds with things in them and things. But this all sounded disgusting to me. And they finished up the breakfast with a giant apple pie with ice cream. And even Americans don't eat that for breakfast. Thank God he got out of there. Although to where, I don't know.
Well, that's the thing. Is it a happy ending? Is a sad ending? I mean, it's...
Is it?
Well, he's escaped and he's alive.
Or is he?
Well, again, you can ask that question.
Yeah, I don't know. That's what's cool about this.
Yeah, that's right. But it's still satisfying. I mean, it's amazing for it to be so open, and yet it's satisfying. It does. It completely satisfied me on, well, each time I read it, but certainly on first reading, even though it was obviously opaque. You'd be hard pushed to say what had happened. There's a very satisfying feeling of closure in that last line.
And you can look at it the one way where it's just this kind of brush with an unusual situation. And, one of these things that you'll tell stories about for the rest of your life. You go, man, I stayed at this place called the Hospice. It was nutty. Or it's like he had died at some point, and this is him going through some sort of purgatory or death process, and that he is moving on. Like he's the one in that coffin being taken away, but he doesn't realize that he's dead. Either ending is plausible, or any other third or fourth ending that you might want to think of. But I feel like that Aickman is writing that line so perfectly that it's satisfying either way.
There's a Conrad Aiken story we covered called Mr. Arcularis that is a little similar to this one that we liked a lot. Remember, it was the guy that takes the boat trip, and then this reminded me of the Robert Chambers story where he's in the hearse and where the hearse is passing by every day too. It's that room for one more urban legend, I think, that's being played on a little bit here in the end. But again, it's an end. You read it and you go, yeah, that's the end. I mean, that should be the end. That seems right as the end.
Yeah,
I don't know why.
If you go for the, he's still alive and he's somehow going back to his life, nothing's going to be the same for him again. He's changed. His encounter has changed, and we understand why we've been shown this episode in his life. Of all the episodes in Mayberry's life that we could have been shown, this is probably the most profound thing that's happened to him. And that's why the story's being told, and that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
And I like the idea. I think it's wonderful if it's sort of a metaphor for death and that process, but I love the idea of him returning to his life after. I mean, because when you've had inexplicable things like this happen to you, especially if you were by yourself, nobody was with you to experience this.
Yeah.
It stays in your mind. You can't, nobody knows what you went through. You have things you can't, it will bother him for the rest of his life. And it actually can lead to some larger scale changes in how you approach the world.
And this is another thing about Aickman, is that for all of the strangeness, is that he's also recording a kind of experience that people have, if not in the details, in the feeling. Because not so long ago, well, it's probably about 15 years ago, I got a call from Mark Gatiss. It was a weekend, and he rang me in a terrible state, and he sounded awful. And I said, "What's the matter? Where are you?" "I've gone away for the weekend." He'd gone to a place in Northumberland called Alnmouth, which is a little coastal town, and you pass it on the train when you get on the train from London to Edinburgh, and it looks really pretty and really beautiful. And Northumberland is very beautiful. And he'd always wanted to go and stay. So he'd just taken himself off there on his own one weekend. And he said the whole experience was as if he'd walked into an Aickman story, because he thought he'd be able to just turn up and find somewhere to stay. And then everywhere was full, even though it's like this very quiet seaside town off season. But there was nobody there, even though everywhere. And eventually he found a room above a pub where they would put him up, and he was sitting in this room, and this sense of evil, he said, he couldn't put it any other way, just came over him, just washed over him, and he was genuinely terrified.
Wow.
Something awful was going to happen. He's a man of vivid imagination, but it was a real experience.
Oh yeah.
And Mark, I mean, he's not. That's not the kind of thing that happens to him normally. So,
the first time I went to London, actually, I had a hotel room in Victoria, and they overbooked. So when I showed up and it was late at night, the woman at the desk was crying. I don't know why. It was a small little hotel. And we said, "Hey, we're booked." And she said, "Oh, I don't have you down." And we said, "Well, what do we do?" She's like, "I'll take you to another hotel." She didn't say anything else to us, still crying. She walked across the street, and we followed her, went into another hotel, and then she left. And we were, "Are we checked in now? Do they have a relationship together?" She didn't tell us anything. I haven't thought of it till just now. That is, it was, and these are the kinds of things that this brings up.
Yeah, and they're real things. Those things happen because other people's lives are so complex. Reality is so complex. There are times when you haven't got a clue what's going on.
Yeah.
It honestly reminds me a little. Have you read any Raymond Carver?
Oh, I love Raymond. Oh, well, I'm so pleased you said that. When I came to Carver after Aickman, I immediately made that connection.
Yeah.
Oh God, it's like non-supernatural Aickman.
Yeah.
Something went on. Something's happening, but you don't know what it is.
Yeah. I love Carver. I absolutely.
Oh, great! Yeah, we're big fans. We've not yet been able to cover him on the show because there's no supernatural affiliation. But I'm a big evangelist of his stuff. Speaking of, we wouldn't have read this author if we weren't going to have you on the show. And so you've given us a real gift, and thank you so much for coming on.
A pleasure. Well, I'm an evangelist for Aickman, so I have been, as you know, for many years. So I'm very happy to do it.
Well, I also want to thank our reader, Greig Johnson. You may know him from such wonderful shows as The MASH Report and Class Dismissed. Greig is the guy that's been pushing Aickman on me for the last couple of years, and it's been on the pile. He gave me a book, The Wine Dark Sea. He gave me that collection. It's been on the pile, and it just keeps moving down to the bottom of the pile. But once he said, "You know what, Jeremy just tweeted the top 4 Aickman stories," and I go, "Okay, let's do this. Let's make this happen."
Which is great. You didn't even know us, and you did a month of work for us. I was like, awesome. Put them on the schedule. That's a month. Done.
So thank you, Greig Johnson, for your excellent reading and also for helping make this happen.
Well, it's been a great pleasure, guys, and I'm delighted to come on and do this.
And with that, I'm Chris Lackey.
I'm Chad Pfeiffer.
Oh, I'm Jeremy Dyson. I forgot to say.
And you've been listening to Strange Studies of Strange Stories.
hppodcraft.com.
hppodcraft.com.